relocation. About 1,500 refused the relocation, but the Pulamsari sub-village community accepted the idea of relocating voluntarily because they acknowledge the trauma experienced by children and elderlies after the eruption. But during a public hearing in the Pelosok shelter, the Sultan and the national government, the Pulamsari community said that, proposed that we will go or relocate voluntarily, but the certificates of our former homes should be clear and legalized. But waiting for the response from the government is very, almost hopeless. So then the Pulamsari community decided to purchase the land in the Karangkendal location site, and then they used their community funding to purchase this land. So this community funding came from the taxi motor business or OJAC and jeep tourism business that increased exponentially after they witnessed the increase of visitors coming to Mbah Marijan's home and village after the eruption. So as of today, the Pulamsari community, has two lands ownership. The former homes in the upper area and the current homes in the Karangkendal relocation site. So in the former homes, however, the use is limited to non-residential activities. But in the Karangkendal relocation site, people begin to rebuild their dairy farming group, which once collapsed after the eruption in 2010. And in this Karangkendal relocation site, on the area in the south, they also built a collective cattle shed to house about 60 dairy cows. So every morning between 4 to 6 a.m., people in Pulamsari must collect grass in the forest or in the dairy or in their home yards in the former homes in the Pulamsari right in the north. So they have to carry the grass with their motorcycles to feed the cows in Karangkendal. So this map is developed based on my field observations on the land parcels had by each farmer. 7 respondents in Mamurapi. This map illustrates a respondent who on daily basis goes back and forth between Pulamsari and Karangkendal relocation site and the forest in the north. And the farmer has 4 grass plots located nearby the national park territory, while the other 2 located outside the territory. So using the rotation system, the farmer will collect grass based on the availability of the young and fresh grass. And the border of the grass plots here is called kikis. So kikis could take the forms of valley or rivers or bamboo or any kind of trees that are agreed upon by the farmers in the forest. And norms were also used by the farmers when using these land parcels. For instance, when a farmer could no longer manage the grass plot, maybe because of the age factor or something like that, so he or she can grant the rights to use the land parcels to their descendants or to a farmer from the same village who requested. So at the end of, to conclude of my presentation, so I used the model of place attachment according to Mihailov and Perkins. So it could be concluded that not only the disruptive events like the eruptions and also the political disruptions from the government, but their ancestral beliefs, their reliance on the forest and childhood memories that corresponds to strong place attachment and their strong sense of community influence their interpretations of their environment. Their interpretation of Mount Merapi as the source of life, that home is a place of birth, that land is ancestors' heritage, and that neighbors are like family members. So all these interpretations combined influence people's behaviors. So after the eruption in 2010, people became resistant to the undesirable policies, and people also try to maintain proximity to former homes and forests after the eruption, and also adapting to changes by going back and forth between former homes and the current homes in Karangkendal. So I think that's all for my presentation, and thank you so much for listening to this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Catherine. It's very interesting presentation, I think. The presentation of Bu Catherine is covering two big issues. First one is environmental issues regarding the Merapi Mountain and its eruption in 2006 and 2010. And then the second one is the socio-political issues which concerning the people in Palam Saris, which has to live in harmony with the disaster. And as you know that actually they have long traditions to live with Mount Merapi. Okay, once again I want to have applause for Bu Catherine, please. Okay, thank you. And exactly 37 minutes. How can you manage that? Okay. Okay, our second speaker is I call it Mas Bindi, but his complete name is Bindi Raditya Purnama. Mas Bindi is holding 2 masters from the University of Leuven, so masters in human settlement and masters in urbanism. And recently, he is the student for the doctor candidate in University of Leuven. He has also many experience in Jakarta and Singapore. So that is short introduction of the second speaker. And Mas Bindi, please, time is yours. 37 minutes, like Bu Catherine.
Hello. I will remove my mask. It's hard to speak with mask. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bindi, as introduced by Pak Sumati. For today, I will speak about Jakarta, about the Ciliwung River. So this is a master thesis that I've done with my professor Kelly Shannon here. It's a 6-month thesis, and there were 2 volumes. One is the collective research, and volume 2 is the design investigation. Next, please. So for the thesis, the way in Leuven works for the master thesis in the Master of Urbanism and Landscape Planning now, the name, we have few students that are researching about almost the same topic. So these are the 5 sites that we were studying. Mine was the Ciliwung River, and you can see that those are five. The other four. So, one is in Netherlands, in Europe. It's Rhine, Meuse, and Scheldt River Delta, and then there is one from Aegean Islands in Greece, and there is one also Nile River in the site is in Egypt, and then the last one is the Yangtze River in China. So we were comparing five of our sites, and then we realized that we shared the same modern problems. So we had the problem of urbanizations and water security and food security, and then disruption of ecologies, and the one that I will speak about is the flooding in Jakarta. So you can see the five squares on the top are in the same scale. So between five of our sites within the same scale, it's very different. The scale is different. Ciliwung River is only 100 kilometers away, kilometers long, but the other rivers are much bigger than Ciliwung River. So with the same problem, with the almost same problem in a different, but we have different contexts. We have different geographic system in each rivers. So in my master thesis, the research question was first how to overcome the clash between formal and informal planning in order to adapt the land to the consequences of subsidence and sea level rise, how to bring back the natural river forms, and the last one is how to specially embed an alternative economy to address food and water securities. On the right side is the map of Jakarta. You can see. The contents of this presentation is about highlighting the issues, historical reading, understanding the rivers, and also peeling the diverse urban fabric. And the last one, because this is a research by design, so the last one is the design that we propose. This is my site. It's in around the Bundaran HI in Jakarta. You can see a small square in the middle. This one is small square in the middle. This is my design site later, but I will mostly speak about the regional and also the city scale of the site. First, that recently is highlighted by the media that the city is going to be submerged by the sea because of the land subsidence and also the increased flooding events. I try to understand the scale of how big is the flooding that will happen. So if you see that the land will be in the human scale, the land will be lower, about actually going from the 2019 until 2100, it will be this low, to be minus 6 meters. So it is going to be very bad in Jakarta. So you can see that the scale here is very in the human scale is very big, and in the future the area that will be flooded is almost 1/3 of Jakarta. You can see here, and then the government is trying to have the proposal of the giant seawall in the north coast of Jakarta. But as you also heard from today project, that the capital city is going to be moved to Kalimantan. This is because one of the problems is because of this, that Jakarta is really hard to be safe. So the government is planning to abandon Jakarta. This is how I illustrate the flooding in Jakarta. You can see the Monas is here. Monas is here. You can see that the flooding is in 2100 can reach up to the Monas. So it is really bad, and the government is really abandoning the city. For the flooding, for the recent map that they have, that the flooding occurs is more apparent in the north area now, and then along to the river. and you can see also that this is because of the massive urbanization. That in 1974 you can see that 84 is very in this area is still green, and then in the 2019 it's very urbanized. You can see also that there is a temperature rise in the north, recorded in the north part, and it's very big, massive in this area. And you can see also the precipitation in this area is very big, as you saw in Java Island, that we have a lot of rain. And I was highlighting the flood in Bundaran HI in 2013, that this was massively flooded. I can skip. So yeah, also from the for around 50 years, that because of the massive urbanization, the agriculture shifted from, you can see the yellow ones was around 1980s, and then it's shifted to the green areas. So because of the urbanizations, because of the farming that keep continuing, it contributes to the flooding risk. So it is because of the urbanization, and also because of the land subsidence is very big. It's because of the deep groundwater extraction. This is the map that the research shown of the deep groundwater extraction by the towers that in Jakarta. So this was contributed because one of the theories that the land is sinking because of the deep groundwater extraction. Yeah, so that was the highlighted issues. Now, I'm entering the historical reading. Yeah, in the colonial times, the Jakarta was Batavia. It was a very important port that created by the Dutch. I wanted to highlight this map because this map spoke about the river that in Java Island, that the river is always most of the rivers going north like this. There is this system, that a very different system, that in the world that the river is going north. It starts from the mountain like this, and it is in a very small scale. So this river was also very important to the Batavia. It was the old city, or we call it Kota Tua in Batavia. It started from there. You can see in the you can see in this one. This was the original river. This is Ciliwung River, and then it started. The Dutch start to exploit the river to become a very man-made canals and become like this. This is already in 1916s. You can see also it's not only Jakarta, but it started way to the mountain towards the Bogor area. So it started. Then this water system was used for the agriculture, to exploit the land to be agriculture. Yeah, you can see also in this is map of 1883. In Jakarta, it was not urbanized as today. You can see a lot of blue areas in this, especially in the north part. It was mostly swamps. So there was it was a big shift from the in the coastal area of Jakarta, and now it's the area that was swamp, that now it's become the area that mostly get floods most of the time. Back to my site again. I'm trying to use the sample of this area, that it was an agriculture area here in 1866, and it started to be a colonial settlements, and then in the modern time it was used by the president, our late President Sukarno, to create Bundaran HI as a national project. So that's also my argument why the flood in 2013 heavily impacted this area. It was because it was an agricultural land. It's not a land for the settlements. This is some of the geographical analysis of the Ciliwung River from the mountain to the coast. You can see that this is the 3D elevation of the whole transect, and then this is the river. You can see that this is the elevation profile, that in the mountain is very steep, and then it starts going to below, and it's not only one way of sloping down from the mountain to the coast, but there is also many rivers that created this undulation of land, and it was a form of alluvial plain in the whole Ciliwung Delta. Yeah. So yeah, this was more about the explanation of how the Ciliwung River was exploited to create more canals, and then there was a plan by the government to also create the flood canal to the east to protect Jakarta from flooding, and it's still ongoing. And yeah, also back to understanding the river, that there are 13 rivers that goes to Jakarta, and the formation was like this. It was like this in the red line, and then now it changed into very man-made canals by the Dutch in the yellow ones. So it was heavily shifted from the natural rivers to become very canal and very colonial water system. So not only that, this is also to understand the landscape of Jakarta. So Jakarta is not completely flat. You can see that it's very flat in the north, in this part, but in the alluvial plain there are many rivers. You can see that there are many rivers and floodplains. So this was the topographical level that I think also the government and the people that lives in Jakarta not really realize about the formation. And you can see that, for example, the flood canal that made in 2018 is going toward this, and you can see that it cuts the valley system, the water system. That this could be also have a very big impact into the ecological. Yeah, this is also to understand the Ciliwung River in the north, in the mountain area. It's already fortified, and these fortifications start to increase the urban runoff to the river. That's why it's also the flood events is going to be is more extreme. Also in this area, for example, the river is the floodplain is occupied by the kampungs. Yeah, and also going to the north is even worse. You can see it's very crowded in this in Ciliwung River in this area. This is the flood canal made by the colonial. So yeah, the Ciliwung River is very urbanized, and yeah, this is also to understand about the urban tissues that Jakarta has. It's a very simple GIS data extraction. You can see that the orange one is the small houses, which can be roughly translated into the kampungs, and the blue one is the big buildings like malls and towers, while the purple one is the big houses like in the modern gated communities or normal houses in Jakarta. So you can see that in Jakarta these systems exist between each other and next to each other, and it's very chaotic. Yeah, you can start to see in my site. So these three sites, this is how it looks. So this is the Bundaran HI. This is the flood canal on the west, and then this is the settlements in Menteng. Yeah, this is a very brief prediction of what happen if the land subsidence keep continues. You can see that the tower can still exist because of the very strong structure going to the bedrocks, while the kampung can creatively float because kampung is very creative. They always adapt to the landscape, and while the landed houses, the houses that we normally live, it's rely on the surface land, and the foundation is not that powerful. So maybe in the future, in 2100, can be very the most prone, and it can be flooded. From that enters the design. So in my proposal, there are 7 principles that Jakarta could apply. First is to adapt the archipelago system that is already our identity as an archipelago country. And then start to number 2 is to accept the water. So you can, mostly we always try to remove the flooding by protecting us and to make it dry. But why do we have to stick with the land? We can actually use the water to live next to us. I mean, you can start to see in other places like Venice and in Greek, for example, they can rely on water. So why not to have a water-based city? So to let the water comes to the city and then to be flooded, while actually you can live next to water. The coastline will not be in this area anymore. It can be shifted going toward to the south and to have a new coast, and then we can have another way to have the urban design or the urban system next to the water system. And yeah, we can also still use the reclamation islands to provide the place for people who to still have money, and then they still want to have like a normal car-based society in the north part. But we can also have some part exist like the kampung in the orange, in the brown color to be exist in the water, and then some areas that can be transferred from road-based urban to be water-based urban. And also in between that we can have a mangrove system that can exist, because start to be with the increase of the sea level rise, the salt intrusion going to the land can be also extreme, and then that actually can be benefit to be a mangrove system. And mangrove is in Indonesia also, we saw in a few places, it's already very beneficial for us. We can extract from the mangroves and so on. So yeah, back to my side. Now that we can understand that with topography, that in the new coast there are few areas is going to be flooded, and this is the Bundaran HI, and it's going to be flooded according to the map that we saw before. And from this we can start to trying to adapt a new coast to have in this one I call it elevated street. So we can have a connection between this part that is actually higher because it was higher, and then it's already settled by the kampungs back then until now. So we can have the elevated streets going to the mall, and then going to the colonial areas, and then going to the east, which is then another higher land. So this is another way to think about the urbanism in the city. So it's not only about road based. So in the kampungs, for example, it can be like this, as we can try to learn from the kampung pluk in Cambodia, that they adapt to the water with this extreme foundation. So it's not limited to have a house that always to be in the ground. We can we can have houses tilted like this. We can also have kampungs that can be also mostly flooded, and then we have floating schools, for example, in the kampung area. So you can see that in the red lines in these tissues become a water-based kampung, and you can also see that this is the floating school. The colonial tissues can be back to like colonial tissues in, for example, in Amsterdam, the road can be shifted to be water-based, so it's become instead of roads become water that they can use boats and they can use other ways. It's not only road-based anymore to become water. And in the big tissues, like in the small, for example, so this is Bundaran HI, and then this is the Grand Indonesia, for example. So instead of having only towers by towers in between plots and people have to walk in the ground, we can also use the sample from Hong Kong that we can have an elevated street. So this thinking that we start to think that the road can be flooded in the future, we can have to start thinking to use that excuse to have it in the now actually. So in the future that this can be like this, like flooded with water, but maybe the flood can maybe not the flood is not coming. So we can also think to have the road to become forest, or as for today we can also use the soft mobility in between malls for people to avoid the flood if the flood is happening. So that's the way of thinking of looking very long future in 2100, and to start to thinking to have the city could be flooded. We can start to then retrace back and then to use that excuse to have the design that can be future proof. So that's my master thesis. Then now what I'm trying to do is to continue the master's thesis study to be the doctoral research. So I'm not looking only for Jakarta area, then I will start looking through also in area in Depok through the Ciliwung Basin, and then Bogor, and then in the Puncak. I'm also start to trying to see what is happening before, what was happening before the colonial era, while the city is still in a Sundanese kingdom. Like before it was today Jakarta was the capital, and now before in the Sundanese era the capital was in Sunda Pakuan Pajajaran, which is in the mountain, which is in the Bogor area. So I start to look also to the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that Sundanese has to understand about the topography, and it is a very early phase of my doctoral research. This is about the Sundanese kingdom, the Pakuan Pajajaran, that actually they know how to live in between two rivers, and they have way to adapt to create the floodplains. And this was the study that has been done by a person from Bogor called Dana Sasmita, that in the city was it's like uplifted to the from the floodplain, and then created fortified walls to protect themselves from the river. And also you can see in the 3D models that they really live in the higher lands instead, and they created this the boundaries of the city in the rivers. It's very different of the way that Jakarta and Bogor live now. That the kampungs really settled towards to the river. So this is still ongoing research that I'm going to do for the next 3 years. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Mas Bindi. You saved about 10 minutes. And before we come to the third speaker, I would like to remind you to start preparing your questions for the discussion sessions. Okay. Last but not least, we will have the third speaker, Professor Kelly Shannon. Professor Kelly Shannon is the professor in urbanism in the University of Leuven, Belgium, and I think at the moment she is the director of Master of Urbanism and also Master of Human Settlements in University of Leuven. She has a lot of experience in teaching, not only in Belgium but also in US and Europe. I think after we have we visited Mount Merapi and then we fly to Jakarta, Prof. Kelly will fly with us to Vietnam. Please, the time is yours, Professor Kelly Shannon.
So I would like to, as my fellow speakers, thank them, but also thank our moderator, and of course the rector, the vice rector, and Cynthia, who I've known for a long time, and the wonderful invitation to begin a collaboration with your university, and all of the colleagues that I've spent some days getting to know and seeing your wonderful city. It's my first time in Indonesia, and I think what I've seen in Yogyakarta is really fascinating. And I think a way that I hope we can continue to work together. So what I want to show is quite a few things. So I will try to move quite quickly. Talking with Cynthia, I will talk. My presentation will be in 3 big parts. So one is, what is landscape urbanism? Very briefly, what is it? Who is it? Why is it an ism? Then I'll look, as has been said, a few design research projects in Vietnam, and finally, what's next? Where do we go from here? And I think, in that sense, I'll be able to relate to the 2 previous presentations. Is my hope. So, what is landscape urbanism? Landscape urbanism, in the most simple way, I think, is understanding how the landscape, the systems of landscapes, the soil, the forests, the topography, the water, how it can structure and actually is already a form of urbanism. It is a form of human habitation and settlement. What's very interesting, of course, when you squish together the words landscape and urbanism, it means it's neither landscape nor urbanism. It's rejecting the duality of city and countryside. It's rejecting the notion, the cultural notion, as opposed to the natural. So it's putting these together. It also has a lot to do with what we're all talking about, and easier to talk about maybe sometimes than to do, but the overlapping intersection of many of our disciplines, whether it's from engineering or ecology, policy, and always, I think, deeply embedded in politics and political processes. What's also, I think, really interesting about landscape urbanism is it's not like master planning and land use planning, where there's a fixed, definitive declaration, this is what it is, this is what it will be, but it says no, it's about a process, because our times are volatile politically, ecologies are moving, so landscape urbanism tries to fix what you can fix, but also let the other things evolve as they would in a process that, so time becomes a very important part. I think also why landscape urbanism came to the fore is, I would say, a pretty strong failure of land use planning and master planning. So it's a kind of revolt or reaction against this. And it also, I think very interestingly, has the whole, it goes back to an idea that has been early in many of our thinkings of cities around the world that we've lost during kind of progress of modernization, urbanization, roads, but understanding the city is also an ecology. It's an urban ecology, and it exists hand in hand and is embedded into natural ecologies. So it's super brief. It's more complicated, of course, but I think what's very interesting is in 1996, it was termed an ism. No, deconstructivism, postmodernism, landscape urbanism also came onto as a kind of fashionable ism. It started in North America, traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, and is now, I think, a kind of globally discussed concept. But a lot of the discussions I have with many of my American colleagues is that actually it's not new. You can call it new, but in fact, it's existed for millennia. It's existed ever since humans settled, because often with, I think as we saw, the indigenous traditional settlements that both of the previous speakers showed, there were clever ways of understanding the landscape and how to use it, but also respect it, and how to settle with it as opposed to conquering it. So I think that's also the argument that it's new and it's a reaction just against planning is a little bit too easy, because also we have long-standing traditions everywhere in the world that are also very culturally nuanced. So who are some of the main protagonists and names maybe in the United States? James Corner, who's a British man who migrated to the U.S. Charles Waldheim, Alan Berger, Chris Reed. There's a whole bunch of them, spanning academia and practice, that have really written a lot about this and proclaimed to make projects that do this. In Europe, famous Dutchman, Adriaan Geuze, who is also part of this discourse. And for him, actually, I think it's quite interesting when you talk to him, he's like, yeah, it's all not new. I mean, as we all know, the Dutch have always settled with nature, trying to conquer nature. So this kind of bringing together of engineering, of city making in the landscape is also for them, is not new at all. People like Christophe Giraud, who's a Frenchman, who's a professor in Switzerland, writes really beautifully about it, as does Sebastian Marot. In Australia, there's also a whole group of people, and many people also in Asia. And for me, a very foundational person is Kong Jianyu, based in Beijing. Again, why did it come? Why did it come? I think there's many reasons. It did develop as an ism, but also why it's been embraced so vigorously by so many people. I think it has a lot to do that we recognize globally we're in a whole bunch of cascading crises. We're in political crises, we're in gigantic socioeconomic crises, culture, more than anything, ecologic crises with the consequences of global warming. And of course, why is it important for architects and urbanists, landscape architects and planners, is because it all has spatial implications. So I think that we really matter. I think for me, the biggest message I would like to give you is that what you're starting out to study, I understand most of you are third-year students, architecture is more necessary now than it, I think, has ever been. Because space is a valuable resource. Once it's wasted, it's kind of gone. So how we project, what we project, really matters. Policy matters, politics matters, engineering matters. But I would say that architecture and urbanism are right up there with something that really matters to have an effect to change the world. And of course, what's also interesting, and I think it was also spoken about in the other two, we now have become almost too intelligent for our own good. We have a lot of technology. We also tend to have a lot of money, and we think with our technology and money we can solve things. We build roads, we can get somewhere faster. Yeah, but of course it makes a lot of other problems. So I think we understand we're in an era what is called SEC. So we're in an era of scientific ecological knowledge. We're in an era where we know we have the might, we have the mechanisms. But I think what's very interesting to understand, and as has been showed, is there's a lot of things we can still learn, not nostalgically, not kind of museumifying, not protecting in a kind of old-fashioned way, but to really understand how traditional ecological knowledge, or what's called tech, how it can work together. So it's not either or, but it's how tech and sec, so traditional ecological knowledge and this scientific whirlwind we're in, how they can complement one another. So that's very brief. Why do we need it? Why do we need it in Asia? I think we need landscape urbanism in Asia and Africa and Latin America. So countries or continents, sorry, that are rapidly urbanizing. They're still in the woes of modernization, population growth, the things that the rector actually introduced in the beginning. And we threaten, I think there's a big threat to flatten out the world. We know in Asia, Singapore is still the kind of gold standard. Everybody wants to be Singapore, the model of Singapore, its beauty, its cleanliness, its so-called modernity, but it's also super generic. It's could be here, could be there, could be anywhere, and I think that's also part of why we need landscape urbanism, because as you'll hopefully see in some of the design research I show, to me, landscape urbanism has very much to do with creating urbanism that is deeply embedded in culture geography, that's deeply embedded in physical geography, so actually cannot be the same in one site from another. There can be no cutting and pasting. There can be no generic architecture. There can be no generic urbanism. So I think, for me, landscape urbanism is also a way to be, it's a kind of a protest. It's a way to resist the kind of globalization, the commodification that we have, and the neoliberal economic policies that are giving us these kinds of images. And just briefly, so we also know, this is for me a very interesting journal that I think a lot of the inspiration we can get as designers also comes not from other designers, but comes from other fields. Nature magazine is an incredibly interesting magazine that's always bringing top peer-reviewed but interestingly written notions of the world of science. And this was a cover of some years ago where we all know, we talk about the Anthropocene. We're in the age where humankind, our actions, are actually even more powerful than geology. So we are a force to be a dangerous force for the world. So even we know just this year, which isn't yet over, there are incredible disasters coming because, I would say, of man's not working with the forces of nature. So we have incredible droughts. This is the images of a rehousing, temporary emergency settlement in Somalia. The incredible floods we've been hearing about, quite devastating in Pakistan, and of course earthquakes that you regularly have here in your own country. So for me, I'm going to jump now to the second part, going through some projects. Again, I will try to go quite quickly, not explaining all the details, but trying to explain a little bit more the approach. And for me, in most of the projects, and the projects I'm presenting are primarily done with a colleague, Professor Bruno de Mulder. We've been working for many years now together in Vietnam. And these 6 principles, I can say, are kind of principles we try to bring to the designs. Ways, I think, explicitly to work for Southeast Asian urbanism with a landscape kind of driver. So I think these will hopefully become clear as I go through some projects. Of course, every country has its own stories, its own cosmologies, its own mythologies. And for me, it's very interesting to try to understand these as a starting point, to try to understand the deep meanings of different cultures. So whenever we work with our students, and myself, I'm clearly not Vietnamese, I'm American Belgian, I think it's really important to try to understand that as best you can as an outsider, the culture. For me also, so this, there's always, in Vietnam, there's the god of the mountains. Here they're both men. I saw you had a goddess in your sea in Indonesia. We in Vietnam, it's still unfortunately only men. The princesses are traded between the men, but the man of the earth and the mountains, and the man of the sea, and that they're always in this kind of epic struggle and battle, but with respect of one another and knowing they're interwoven. To me, the map that you see on the other side is really beautiful. It's very much part of coming from Chinese, but in many parts of Southeast Asia. I don't know if it's also in Indonesia, but the ancient cartography, where they were drawing only the waterways and the mountains, and the cities were simply labeled, so they weren't even drawn as a morphology. So the map of the nation, in this case it's the nation at the time, Vietnam used to be called Dat Nok, which means earth and water, so it's deeply embedded. When Ho Chi Minh proclaimed independence, he also talked about the water and the soil. So it's very deep in stories for kids, but also down to the political decorations. Of course, the Mekong, I'm now going to focus on the Mekong River Delta. The Mekong River Delta is partially in Cambodia, partially in Vietnam. It's part of a long system. In Vietnam, they're at the end of the line, which of course is problematic because they're part of a bigger basin. They're part of the Mekong River Commission, a political organization that agrees to tell each other what they're doing on this gigantic river. Unfortunately, China doesn't join the pact, and they, of course, are doing the most damage on the river because they're building gigantic hydroelectric dams. So Vietnam has no topography in the delta, so they kind of get all the effects of everybody upstream. So I only show you this to understand that even when we make a very small project in a city, it's very important to understand the much bigger ecologies, landscape systems, and political implications that come. So this is the territory where I've spent quite some time living and working and trying my best to understand. It's a really spectacular, like most deltaic places. It's a beautiful place. It's a place of mud, not so much earth and not so much water, but this mix, no, always, and changing gradients of its wetness. And of course, since humans like more to live on land, we try to change the mud into earth. We try to change this delta and waters that are always moving into fixed things. We try to engineer it. So what we do also, I won't go into details here, but we try also, and this is always a work in progress, because as we saw in Indonesia with the earthquake, regulations are always changing. So trying to always understand the international, the national, and then the very local regulations, and how it works in a cycle, and then how our projects fit into the policy, but also the predictions, the modeling in terms of climate, the climate crisis and global warming. So I'm going to show chronologically a few projects. Again, not really the details of the projects, but they were all, the first three were done for the Vietnamese government. So myself and Bruno de Mulder, and then working with different teams, sometimes of students, sometimes graduates, young professional offices. We basically work as a consultant to a Vietnamese planning agency. Vietnam is still a communist government, everything is very top-down. They now start to have private development, whatever that means in a communist system. But anyways, these first three projects were done precisely for the Ministry of Construction. And the first one was a place, a city, where I worked myself during my PhD, looking at a city in the south, in the middle of the Mekong Delta. And as for me, this is a really wonderful picture. Whoops, something has happened. Okay, the wonderful photograph I showed you that seems to have disappeared. It's really nice because the people, when the monsoon rains come, it's not that they're running from the rains. The farmers welcome the rains, of course. the children play in the rain. So it's not a fearful event, but it's part of celebrations and traditions. I'm sure it's similar and different also here. Again, as I think Bindi also showed, we always spend a lot of time trying to also look back in historic maps, not just for their beautiful cartography and their beautiful drawing, but to understand logics. This is a map also made by the colonialists. Here it's the French, not the Dutch. And what's very interesting, these maps in the same scale, you see during the French time in the 1920s when this map was made, still half of the city was basically a swamp. And it progressively became filled. So the way to urbanize in the Mekong Delta is typically to bring in between 2 and 4 meters of sand. So they take sand from Cambodia and from Laos and they fill the land to turn this kind of wet land into safe, buildable land. Of course, making huge problems, but giving the idea that we live on the land and we're safe. What you see on the other drawing is the incredible system of drainage and canals, from very fine grain to much bigger waterways. So our design project, which was Vietnam, I say I'm kind of against master planning, but in fact in Vietnam, master planning is still the only legal tool they have. So we work on kind of strong principles of landscape, and then we have to end with a master plan, and then our Vietnamese colleagues translate it into the legal requirements. So for us, one of the biggest points of how to deal with the city and its massive growth, because its growth was going from 1 to 2 million in 30 years. We said, before you start, you have to manage your water. So this is, I again won't go into details, but for us, the water structure was the basis. And having ways to clean the water, having floodable parks that it could expand during flooding season. In industrial areas, having water bodies that could be cleaning industrial waste before evacuating it back into the natural system. And then we also worked with, you'll see the big green areas. So typically in Vietnam, what they like to do is they would urbanize the entire riverfront. So this is the lower branch of the Mekong River. And we said, because what's particular to this city, all of the Mekong Delta is called the rice basket, but they have orchards, so they have fruit trees. And we said, you should recognize this as an identity of your city and keep it. So we redirected a road that was going to bulldoze through it, and we said, no, you should go around and recognize this is your identity, and it's also an alternative economy to rice, because they get much more money per hectare of fruit than they do of rice. But then we said, why don't you make a big central park for experimental new forms of orchard production. Go to high-tech agriculture, get to much more productive landscape, and also keep it as a park for the citizens. So instead of filling, so what is in white here is the urban, we designed urban islands. So we said you should have high, dry, safe, fill your 4 meters of high, safe land. And then everything in this light green during the monsoon period would be floodable. So you would basically have islands in a sea of lowland rice, and then higher areas of forest and combined with fruit production. So this was a big fight that we had, but in the end, this master plan got approved. It was something that the city realized, instead of going generically to be an alternative for China, of bringing microchips and production of textiles, that we said, no, embrace your agricultural heritage and make that your thing, and make food security your identity. And you'll see that came back later in a bigger plan for the Mekong Delta. So the section in the Mekong Delta, the section is the most important thing. It's all about microtopography, about managing water levels, but also about managing the earth, trying to keep the minimal cut and fill, and to also begin to propose, new ways to settle on stilt or floating areas. Of course, like I've seen in Indonesia, same in Vietnam, roads, the power of the ADB, the power of the World Bank, the power of the governments to build roads as a sign of progress is happening, much to the detriment, I think, of the cities themselves. But we said, at least when you're going to build these massive roads and this big infrastructure, can you nuance the profile? Can you reprofile the road to include productive landscapes? We also suggested that they use different trees and different colors of trees to let you know where you are in the city, and to include fruit trees in part of the system. And for us, of course, we are always pushing public transport. So sometimes in the more urban areas, say the cars in the middle, the public transport off to the side, and in the more rural areas where you could have public transport being more the kind of main line with motorbikes on the side. So in the end, what this comes to, I think there's a bit of a delay. So what it comes to is with a lot of steps in between. The plan on the left is the same master plan that we created. Again, with the big green areas being the orchards, the existing orchards, the kind of experimental park, and the white areas being the high dry islands. And our Vietnamese colleagues translated it into the Vietnamese regulations and land use. That is still the plan that now needs a new revision. Every 10 years, secondary cities, or no, this is a first order city, they revise their master plan. So the next project I want to show is linked to this. It's, again, I'm going a bit chronologically. And this was for the entire Mekong Delta, the Vietnamese part of the Mekong Delta. Of course, we were hired by the Vietnamese government, so we couldn't really talk about Cambodia. And this was a project that went on for 3 or 4 years. It produced about a 500-page report that was mostly drawings, so they were a little shocked that it wasn't mostly text, it was mostly drawings. And that was approved by the Ministry of Construction. But unfortunately, and I think it's telling of development in much of Southeast Asia, they made a new land law, they made a new division of responsibilities, and they now put urban planning in the Ministry of Planning and Investment. Yeah, so it tells you where the priority is. The Ministry of Construction now is kind of just making the stamps of where you can build. So it's so our plan that we worked on for a long time and got a lot of buy-in from various ministries is now off to the side. And the Ministry of Planning and Investment, that's about mostly only investment, is in charge, which is for us, of course, very sad, but we still try to do something. So this plan, anyways, this was just showing where it was. Those images seem too heavy. Again, we always look back unfortunately in Vietnam, there's not too many archives, but the French archives are quite rich, trying to understand how the Delta worked over time. What was its history? Oh, sorry. What's interesting in Vietnam is that the Delta was a swamp. It was something that was then drained. So in the north of Vietnam, they built dikes, much like what the Dutch do. No, they build dikes and you fight the water, you keep it out. But in the Mekong Delta, they said no, we need the water. So they dug canals, okay, and they had dikes on the side of them. But the idea was to literally kind of drain the swamp to turn it into an arable land. So it is the most productive land. Of course, it was done with Covey labor. It was massively human-intensive enterprise, changing basically the surface of the earth in a quite amazing way. But also with it then came a whole series of a whole series of particular ways to settle. So once you would build this canals, you would have higher banks, and then you started to get linear settlements. And before the French came, there were, of course, quite a lot of different settlements by various groups. And the French really accelerated. So they didn't invent the process. They accelerated the process of building the dikes and of, say, making the land more profitable. Of course, that was their main interest. So as in many parts of Indonesia, this part of Vietnam is really traditionally known as low-lying, domesticated nature that is rice. So for us, what we start, this is so the Mekong Delta, as it's geographically defined. We start looking at the soils to understand. You could say that even though on first glance, when you go to the Mekong Delta, you can say it looks kind of the same. The architecture certainly looks the same, but when you start really looking at the landscape, it's quite nuanced, and of course it has a lot to do with the soil. It's a population of about 18 million, just this part of the delta, and as I say, quite productive. So for us, a starting point was to look at what you're not seeing. No, we're not seeing soil, so it's the underground. From that, we then started making maps. Similar, I suppose, to Indonesia. There's many different data sets. Information is power, so people didn't want to give us information, et cetera, et cetera. So we started making our own maps from different information we could get here and there. And for all of our Vietnamese colleagues, this was, and for us, this was a very important map because we put the bathymetry, so the elevation of the sea, in the same colors as the flooded area on land. So typically everybody had not the hydrologists, not the experts, but say normal people, politicians, say, oh, the coast is what floods the most. No, it's not true. If you look at this, what floods the most is actually because there's a depression in very close to the border of Cambodia that floods. Of course, the saline intrusion is what is really strong on the coast. But so this map is again an analysis map, and the way of drawing also switched people's minds quite a lot. And this became something very important for us to use as a way to convince later about our design, as you'll hopefully see. So I think it's having a small delay. I don't want to click it again because it will. Well, so this was actually after the master plan had already been presented. It's just showing. It's an article from the New York Times that the Vietnamese government will not show the population. So of course they monitor also how information is, as every country, distributed, because this map shows that by 2050 that actually most of the Mekong Delta will also not be there because of sea level rise and subsidence, similar to Jakarta. So what we then did in our work to develop this plan, it's coming, is we really worked with something we understood how to, when we started reading the work of geographers, we understand that the Mekong Delta is for geographers and for soil scientists and for agronomists, it exists as what they call agroecological zones. So there are 6 agroecological zones. The borders aren't completely clear. This is our drawing of them, but that have very, very different qualities. And once you know this, you can start to see very specific practices, very specific, also urbanism. So I won't even talk about them so much, but just give you the impression. So the one closest to the border of Cambodia has a lot of floating houses, stilt houses, where actually different ethnic groups, other than the majority Kin people live. Flooded forest in this low land. Area further along the alluvial, along the rivers themselves, incredibly productive area. The most closest to the river is highly productive. There's an area a little bit by the Gulf of Thailand, also close to Cambodia, where there's a little bit of topography. There's 7 sacred mountains, but they're being excavated by actually Swiss companies for cement. So it's really a kind of horrendous rape of the landscape that is very difficult to stop because it's giving quite profit to the government. And then we have an area a little bit further to the south that's very protected also, so there's a lot of rice combined with fish farming. the area completely in the south, Kamau, it's an incredible, interesting area. It used to be mostly mangroves, but the Vietnamese themselves are, so first the Americans bombed it like crazy during the war, lost a lot of its mangroves, it was replanted. Now the Vietnamese are transforming it into shrimp fields, again, because it's much more money for a poor farmer to gain from shrimp that's exported. So there's a massive kind of transformation. And then finally on the coast, again, where there's a lot of saline intrusion, there's a lot of engineering projects trying to keep out the salt, trying to keep the fresh water in through different systems of dikes. So basically, we worked with understanding this and knowing that infrastructure development is so important in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. We imposed all of the planned projects of the government, of the ADB, and of the World Bank on the flooding map. And what we convinced the Vietnamese government is there's a road that they wanted to build also for national security. It's always a big issue, of course, along the border of Cambodia. And we said, guys, don't take this loan. Don't build the road because it's going to be flooded. It's common sense that you should not do this. And we had a lot of argumentative meetings in the Hanoi, and they rejected the loan of the ADB. After seeing this. Because of course every ministry does its own thing in its own little straitjacket, and by beginning to combine information and maps that can clearly show, they were very, very much alarmed. This, again, not to explain the whole story, this is the master plan we did develop. And the big part of the story is that in the north, we proposed to make massive rainwater reservoirs to then release water during the dry season. To really increase this color green is fruit, so the orchards are very productive, to strengthen the mangroves along the East Sea, and then of course to have the interconnectedness of cities that they're all looking for. And then what we did is, I'm jumping scales, is we developed 3 typologies of ways to re-inhabit the landscape. So in the northern area, we said you could have houses, you should return to the ancient tradition of houses on stilts, so you can exist with these extreme inundations. In the coast, we said stilts won't work because the power of the waves and potential tsunamis is too strong, but you can have floating houses because they can move. And in between is where you can develop on land. So the kind of plan for the mangrove afforestation, you can see clearly here. And then the different typologies. So up in the north, we said you should have houses on stilts, but combined with these reservoirs, but these reservoirs can also be new forms of fish farming. In the area of the alluvial plain, you have the high, dry, safe areas, normal urbanization in a sea of rice. But also the Japanese have been developing very interesting technology of renewable energy, very cheap to farmers can install themselves on top of crops, and it doesn't burn the crops. So we said, you should think of every piece of land being able to do 2 or 3 things at once, not just one thing. And then finally in the coast, we said really bring back mangroves, different kinds of mangroves, and then you can have clearings in the mangroves, clearing in the mangrove forest, where you can have floating housing that can move to work with the different possibilities of fish, and also using the wind energy, which they're starting to do as renewable energy. So again, this was the plan as our Vietnamese colleagues transformed our plan, say, into the regulations that was brought to the government. Maybe I will. I have 2 more projects, but I will just show the images really quick, not say too much because I think I'm out of time. This was a competition we were invited for with 4 very big firms, Nikken Sekke and Finnish one, and then our 2 small researchers, basically to play devil's advocate. So it was for the extension of the city of Saigon across the river to double its size. And what we decided to do is we decided to, it's not responding, it has trouble with that map. Again, looking at so the project was to look on the other side of the river, where the city has not been so much, and to mirror the city across the river, doubled its population. So what we did as a starting point is we looked at all the master plans that developers have been developing and made a kind of critique on that. And this is the only drawing I should really explain a little bit. So in black is the footprint of Saigon as you see it today. And what this is it's the topography. So the darker green is the highest, the yellow is been filled, and all of the blue is very, very low land. When we did the competition, this was had already changed. They already filled it. And then we said, if you take the master plans of all the developers, it's going to be that. And we said, actually, you should at least stick with where we are now and not add more soil, because you should develop new typologies that respond to living with wetness. So that was the basis, again, of a green and blue system. And then very important for us is we developed also a water transport system. We said, forget all these roads. Your richness is in your water. So why not use an app? Why not develop an app? So like grab bike, grab car, grab boat. So you could have a fleet of boats. And you could have, if you're a party of 50, you get a certain size boat, and you could have some fixed stops, but it also could be on demand. So this was something that we thought. And then what you see on the sections above are what is planned, and then this is what we said could be an alternative. So our idea was always to build more housing, more urban development, but more green and more blue. So it wasn't to say that we just make landscape, it's too easy, but we know there's an urban pressure, but how to build higher, denser, but also giving then more space to blue and to green. And we also said that you should have a tradition that they used to have a long time ago in Vietnam, that they've abandoned, but when a child was born, you plant a tree. And we said, now when you build this part of Saigon, 6 million people, you have 6 million trees. You should put a tree for every new person that comes to the place. So I think I will skip this one and just go to if I can go quickly to the end slides where I make a small conclusion. I'm trying to go fast, but so these are a lot of layers. I'm just going then to the end. So for me, what's very nice about landscape urbanism and its potential is it's really about to carefully read what you have. So to not start with tabula rasa, to not start with the cut and paste image of what you want it to be, but what it is. And then to understand how that can become a way to go forward. And it's a way that we can make things very specific culturally and geographically. And for me, then my research, I'm now on my first sabbatical. I'm living in Vietnam for 4 months. And I'm really interested in looking deeper into indigenous traditions to understand how, from these indigenous traditions of landscape urbanism, and this is a kind of work in progress of how we can understand different worldviews. They had relations, different ways of dealing with the climate, whether you look in the Arctic Circle or in the monsoon areas. There is a very specific response to the context. So for me, that's something I'm going forward with. And for me, also, I take this a little bit out of context, of course. But Robert Venturi, I think you all know, this wonderful book, Learning from Las Vegas. It's about architecture. But for me, a quote in it that I think is really fantastic is that learning from the existing landscape is a way of being revolutionary for an architect. So for me, that's where we don't have to follow or should resist and should revolt a bit on the pressure of developers by really trying to look carefully to the existing landscape. And I end only with this. Again, a little propaganda, but we have an International Center of Urbanism in Leuven where we're working on these issues, and I would invite you to look at it, and over the coming few days that I have left here, hopefully we'll find ways to make meaningful collaborations and to include the work and that the researchers and students are doing to also to go forward in a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kelly Shannon. So usually in the architecture seminar, we will see the beautiful design of buildings, but today we don't see the beautiful design of buildings. Instead, we are awakened by the fact that there is some disaster which can be caused by architecture, like what Mas Bundi said. That can you imagine that his presentation is interesting, but it's also scary, I think, because at the end of this century, Jakarta will sink due to the rise of sea level and the subsidence and the land subsidence. But Bu Catherine reminds us that there is a local wisdom. So Bu Shannon, Prof. Kelly Shannon reminds us that we should combine between the traditional ecological knowledge and scientific ecological knowledge to produce the more longer safe place for human beings. Okay. We still have about 15 to 20 minutes for discussions. So please, for students, our participants, and also our colleagues, lecturers, to don't forget to state for your name and who your questions addressed to. Please, on my left maybe. Is there any question from you? Or this in front of me? Please. Or the West Wing? Or from the lecturer? Okay, Bu Lucy, please. Set your question addressed to Bu Lucy, don't forget. Okay.
Thank you very much, Pak Mardianto. Yeah, it's very interesting topics today from Bu Catherine, Mas Bindi, and also Prof. Kelly. I have very simple question actually. First for Bu Catherine, yeah, from your research, what is the most dominant aspect to support the resilience of Palam Sari village? Is that cultural or probably social or psychological? Or maybe it's a physical environment itself? And from based on those aspects, is there any special policy from the government or from the community, yeah, to how to anticipate the impact of the eruption, the mountain eruption, Merapi eruption, to maintain that resilience condition? And then for Mas Bindi, yeah, that's interesting that Jakarta will sing. For a few years after this. And you proposed 7 principles. How is the government response? Is there any special policy to respond? How to anticipate the flood, Ciliwung flooding. And then for Prof. Kelly, this is a special question, Prof. Kelly. Why you choose Vietnam as your case study? Why not Indonesia?
Why did you choose Vietnam instead of Indonesia?
Yeah, that's the very simple question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
One questioner, but a lot of questions. Okay, please, Bu Katrin, and then Mas Windy, and the last is Prof. Kelly.
Thank you so much for the questions, Ibu Lucia. I think these two questions are very important, and this is something that I maybe haven't mentioned in my presentation. In terms of your first question about what kind of assets or factors that are important for the people in terms of community resilience, so I can say that learning from their experience of dealing with the eruption in 2010, I can say that people's social capital is the most significant one. It helps them to survive these disaster impacts of in 2010. And I remember when I read some articles from resilience theorists, including John Daniel Abramson is one of them, and they said that there are three capitals or assets that people should have in order to increase their resilience, which are the built environment capital, and then the natural capital like rivers and oceans or mountains, but also social capital. So again, I think as what I just presented today, after the eruption in 2010, these people in Palamsari had lost their economic assets like the cattle, like the dairy cows, homes. They did not have money at all after the eruption, but because of their strong social cohesion, in which they evacuated to different shelters as one community, and then they planned for the relocation as a community, and they plan where we have to go after this, and they did that collectively. So I think not only the social cohesiveness, but also the leadership shown by Mbah Marijan and also the head of the sub-village. So I think this proves that social capital is one of the most important thing when we talk about community resilience. And the second question is whether there are some improved collaborations between the government and the local communities in Palamsari. I believe that after the eruption in 2010, people learn about how important it is to embrace not only the local knowledge of disaster mitigation, but also the technologies about how to predict or where to, in terms of the evacuation system or the early warning system and so on. And they also embrace the technology using WhatsApp in order to coordinate one to another and also talk with the disaster mitigation agency. So when the volcano shows this increase in its eruptive activities, so the government will distribute this information to the Palamsari community with WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, I think in the case of Palamsari, I think it's a very important telecommunication medium to share this information about disasters. Am I answering your questions, Ibu Lucy? Okay, thank you so much, Ibu Lucy.
For the question for how the government respond to my proposal, well, first of all, it was a radical proposal. That's why it's still within the academic. But luckily, I had experience to work with the South Jakarta municipality in Distarcip, Dinas Tata Ruang, the planning agency. So I worked there for 5 months as a professional staff, and I introduced my thesis to them. what I learned from the government is that government is very limited. It's not as what we think that the government has all the resources. No, they don't have. Especially Jakarta is big. They don't even have enough power to control the kampungs. The kampungs, it's too much the kampung for the government. The sinking land is too much for them. That's why they are escaping from the city. So actually, what we offer from this course of landscape urbanism and to use the design to think of how we propose in the future is to not only rely on the government, to use what we could done from the people. The kampungs can use their power, community power, to work within to each other. So, and for people like us, we can start to realize that we shouldn't invest or start to stay in the places that is actually flooded, and to understand the geography, the landscape of Jakarta is there are rivers that you shouldn't be living in that river. Maybe then you start to think of maybe not to live in lower in the floodplains, for example. So it's not only about government and how we. It's not always top down. So it can be. So this design thinking is to extract us to think bigger and not to rely on the top down principle. I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Well, if I'm very honest with you, why Vietnam? Why not Indonesia? To be honest, it started coincidentally, as many things in life do. I was employed at KU Leuven as a scientific researcher, and not before teaching, to work on a local Agenda 21 project of UN Habitat. We were working in 3 countries, Morocco, Vietnam, and Kenya. And actually, I was chosen to work on Kenya, but there was a small family. I started work 1 year later than initially planned. I said, now it's not Kenya, it's Vietnam. So I went to Vietnam. I didn't know much about Vietnam. Being an American, the way they tell the history of Vietnam is quite different. So, but I started working on this project, LA21. So it was the idea of capacity building in a city in the north to think about how to go forward with city planning in a city that didn't have a lot of capacity because people were fleeing the city. And I basically fell in love with Vietnam. So I did a PhD about Vietnam. And actually, there's been many opportunities to work in many places. In our program, it's international. But I kind of stubbornly said I want to stay in one place to know more. So instead of jumping around, I've now been working in Vietnam 25 years. And still feel I don't know enough, of course. But only now, after 25 years of some knowledge, reading a lot and working a lot with local people, local professionals, I understand that Southeast Asia is also some kind of unity with a lot of differences. And so for me, the next phase of my career, I also want to expand to other parts of Southeast Asia. But again, still staying in Southeast Asia, because I think every geography and every culture has it's so difficult to understand. I think, in fact, I know probably more about Vietnam's history and urbanism than I do either about American or Belgian, 2 nationalities I have. So I think it's that. So it did start coincidentally, and it just became. I fell in love with the place. So and then I decided to stick with it. But I think the knowledge that you gain can then, after some years, start to go to other places. So.
We hope that next project is in Indonesia, so we can work together here. Okay, actually, I would like to have one person to raise question, please, because of time. Okay, at the back. Is there any here? In my left? Okay, so two questioners.
Okay, my name is Jason. My question is for...
Your
I think
name,
it's-
please.
Huh?
Your name?
Jason.
Jason.
I think this question is for all the speakers. I have two. May I ask two or just one?
Okay.
Well, the first one, as we know that we live in an era where mobility and urban development is something that has a rapid progression. And this thing could cause damage to our environment. And beside the green technology that we have today, what could we do to continue being productive and also continuing our urban development, but still saving our environment? And the second question is for Bu Katarina. Based on your perspective on your research in Mount Merapi, does the urban planning in Mount Merapi area is suitable for evacuation on eruption or other natural disasters that could happen in the area? If it doesn't suitable, what could we do to make it a better road for evacuation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, please.
My name is Dito, and my question is for Bapak Bindi and Prof. Kelly. The term of water-based road that I think sometimes when the water-based road is getting in a place that sometimes people don't even really know about a river and how to use it, it's going to be something special. And how that thing going to be affected the population and how they going to be change the people around to how they work, how they do their chores, and yeah, about something like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, students. Please start from Bu Katrin. Give the answer.
Thank you so much for the question. So, I think I can answer the third question that you have about whether the urban planning is needed in the case of Mount Merapi. Am I correct? Okay. So yes, of course, urban planning is something that is vital in how to increase the community resilience. But before we plan something for the community, in this case, there's another type of planning that we need to promote. That is community-based planning. So the community-based planning is the planning where we try to find what the assets are meaningful for them, because we talk about the indigenous people in Mount Merapi, so we cannot ignore these cultural assets, physically and socially, for instance, that are important for them. So I think all those lists about the local assets need to be something that important to inform the urban planning. So, for instance, yes, there's a evacuation system that had already been implemented in Mount Merapi, and also where the evacuation centers are distributed. So when there's eruption, so people should go from here to there. So there's a comprehensive evacuation system. But in the scale of some sub-villages which are in the upperland, where they are geographical or topographical constraints, so sometimes the streets that we acknowledge in the modern city, for instance, are not the streets that are familiar for the people in the rural areas, like in Mount Merapi. So what I'm trying to say is that how people perceive streets and which streets are important for them perhaps are also critical to inform the current urban planning. So basically, again, I think what is important right now, how to encourage people to participate, in planning for their future resilience. I think that's all.
To answer the question about mobility and how the mobility impacts the environment. Well, for the standard now, so you can see, especially in Jakarta and any other big cities in the Southeast Asia, they focus on shifting the car mobility into transit-oriented development. But I think I want to extend the question into a question of do we really need to have a mobility in the daily basis? I don't think to expand what you say, that the mobility is the key of the urban development in today's world. It's relatively new. I think the car-based mobility and also all the mobility system that we have to go to the office every day, we have to go to campus or to move every day. It's very recent. It's actually only 100 and up until 200 years. So throughout our history, we never have this kind of urban tissues, and I don't think that can also exist. So you can leave the question of how to solve traffic problems and the mobility to the experts, but for us, we can actually question how do we live? Can we live into to have another way of living? For example, the pandemic itself in 2020, when the pandemic happens, you see that the roads were empty. So is it really the way that we are going to live to the future with all car-based mobility? So I think I will just leave it as a question. Should we really have to address the issue about the mobility as you were asking?
Well, maybe I think both questions were really interesting, and I think they're somehow linked. Because we know that modernization, urban development, the rising of economic standards for everybody, of course, is where development in general is headed, often at the expense of the environment. No, the environment is the kind of gets all the bad consequences of it. I think what's interesting at the moment of time we're living in is that we've recognized as a global society, of course with always some people who do not recognize, but that the way we've been going towards progress and growth and development is basically a dead-end street, and we're reaching a tipping point, a critical tipping point, where if we don't change radically and have new paradigms of how to measure success, how to measure progress, we're going to be finished. No, nature is stronger than us. So the environment that we've been abusing will take its revenge. Is taking its revenge. So I think for me, what's interesting when we talk about water resource or the bigger environment is we have to pick up on the global wave of environmental awareness, of people understanding that we are in this critical moment, and as architects and urbanists do our best to try to help clients, to try to help politicians see different possibilities. So first by design, but also by simply, like the map I showed you when we changed the Mekong Delta, the way we drew the flooding inland in the same colors as the depth of the sea, and then you put a road on that, it's clear you would be wasting your money and the loan that your grandchildren are going to have to pay back to the ADB. There's no sense. So I think this kind of finding a new way of seeing is the first step of finding a new way of accepting. how to do designs. So I think that's for me where analysis and the careful reading of context is really important as design, because to me they're linked. So about the water resources, if you say that for so long the river is the backyard, no, it's the garbage dump, nobody cares. But if you start showing, as we can do as creative people with drawing, a new way to look at the river, to understand its importance, to understand the cosmologies that are linked to it, how it's deeply embedded in our history, there can be a new love for the river, a new appreciation. So I think half of our job is to just show people how to see differently, and then hopefully how to accept something that can change fundamentally business as usual, because business as usual is not possible for much longer, because we know that we're in trouble. So it's not a direct answer, but
Okay, thank you very much for 3 speakers. Please give big applause to the 3 speakers. Thank you for managing the time so very well and make my job easy. And I think the last words of Prof. Kelly, that we have to define what is success and growth in the future is, I think, very important. And I think to Vela here, you have a task to relate this new paradigm with the future of Atmajaya Yogyakarta as a Laudato Si University. Thank you, and I'll give back this stage to Bu Oci, please.
Thank you. Such a wonderful session. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that we can take so many new insights and takeaways from this event, from all the presentation from our 3 speakers. As we come to the end of this general lecture, we invite you to join the closing prayer. Shall we have a moment of silence? I will lead the prayer. Lord, all merciful God, we praise and honor you for today's lecture. Thank you for the knowledge and insights that makes us broadly understand the world of architecture and its advantages to the world where we live, the world that you have created in beauty and love. Be merciful to us, Lord, so we can participate in your providence in the middle of this world through the architectural science and works we can afford. Grant your grace to Mr. Bindi Raditya Purnama, Professor Kelly Shannon, and Mrs. Katarina Depari, Mr. Sumardianto, and all of us who attend this lecture. Lord, we are living in the age of challenges, crises, and disruptions. Hopefully, the Atmajaya University of Yogyakarta and KU Leuven can work together to bring hope to this despairing contemporary world. God, light of the eternal truth, light our hearts and minds and encourage us to reflect the lights in our daily lives as students, scholars, or academicians through our knowledge and skill. Lead and guide us always. Lord, and receive our prayer that we offer in faith and hope. Amen. Okay. On behalf of the Department of Architecture, Universitas Atmajaya, I'm as the Master of Ceremony, would like to thank the audience for the lively discussion and participation in this guest lecture. We would also apologize if there's our last pleasing words. That's all from us. The certificate will be sent to your email, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you so much.